Hello and welcome to the AHR podcast, where we engage in captivating conversations about the built environment and its influence on shaping a more positive future. I'm Hira Teirney, an Associate Director at AHR. I've been involved in a variety of education projects, and I'm particularly interested in the environmental demands of modern educational environments and the innovative methods we can use to tackle climate change. In the UK, 80% of buildings which would contribute towards the UK net zero carbon target for 2050 already exist. It is clear that we need to be creative in applying thoughtful strategies for reusing and refurbishing existing building stock in order to meet future net zero targets. In today's podcast, we'll be bridging the gap between awareness and solutions in achieving decarbonisation, exploring the actions that can inspire commitment to make a meaningful impact. I'm joined today by Syd Cottle, Director of Estates Management at the University of Liverpool, and Nia Prys Williams, Energy Manager at Liverpool John Moores University, in addition to AHR's Head of Sustainability, Robert Hopkins. So let's begin. Welcome, Syd. Could you give us a brief background to your role, please?
Yeah, thank you. Syd Cottle, Director of Estates Management and Infrastructure at the University of Liverpool. So I'm responsible for the university campus, the main campus in Liverpool, and also residential accommodation in South Liverpool. We've also got a couple of campuses on the Wirral too. So responsible for quite a large team, covering a whole range of areas of estates management, but particularly I'm responsible for the sustainability team and the energy team, of which together we work really hard in terms of pushing the sustainability agenda and also decarbonisation.
Thanks, Syd. And welcome to Nia. Please, can you give us an overview of what you're involved with?
Hi, thank you so much for having me on today. I've really been looking forward to it. I am the Energy Manager for Liverpool John Moores University. We are a sort of medium-sized institution. I've been here since June 2022, and my job is to do the day-to-day energy management for the estate. But two of my primary objectives as soon as I got here was to produce a decarbonisation plan, and off the back of that, produce a carbon management plan, because around the time I started, the organisation had just produced its climate action plan, where it made a huge number of commitments, including the one to net zero carbon by 2035. And it really wanted to understand, how are we going to get there? So my job was to work with the right consultants, get the right people around the table, and get that plan starting to firm up so we can start that journey.
And Robert, can you please tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hira. And again, thanks so much for inviting me to take part with on this. My role with AHR, I've got two hats really for today's podcast. Hat number one is my day-to-day role as an architect leading projects, particularly in the higher education sector. And so, again, I've been lucky enough to be involved with a really broad range of projects across the sector over the last 15, 20 years. But then, more importantly for today's conversation, I sit as Head of Sustainability for AHR. And so that has a role in terms of our own sustainability journey to get to net zero carbon as a business, but then also to make sure that is really high on the agenda of every single one of our projects that we're delivering around the UK.
Thank you. And before we get going, Robert, could you please give us a brief definition of one of the terms that we'll be using throughout the podcast today? What are the three scopes of decarbonisation?
So I've drawn the short straw to be the one that gets picked up on getting my definition wrong. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, the three scopes that you talked about there. Scope one is generally the emissions that you make directly yourself, and so for a university that might be the energy that you're directly using on a day-to-day basis with a particular building or delivering a particular piece of research or something like that. Scope two then is indirect emissions, and so these might be the emissions that, for instance, have been used to create the electricity that is powering one of your buildings or one of your kind of pieces of research. And then scope three, this is the really tough one that everyone really struggles with, and it's probably the one that's the big number as well. You cannot underestimate what a big influence this is. And this is organisations that are delivering services. So for the example of a university, that might be AHR's emissions delivering professional services to design a building. So it wouldn't be all of our emissions as a business, but all of those that are relevant to the service that we're delivering. So as you can imagine, for a university, there'd be a lot of people that contribute to those Scope 3 emissions for them.
Excellent, thank you. I think you passed the test on the 3 then. Right, so let's move forward towards today's discussion points. So the first one we'll start with is in the baseline for the podcast searches. So where are you now? Where are you on your decarbonisation journey? Should I throw over to Nia?
Okay, yes, that's absolutely fine. Yes, as I said, I was employed specifically to look at our decarbonisation plan and carbon management plan. You know, universities have been producing carbon management plans since, I think, around 2009, 2010, and have been using this 2005 baseline as the original starting point. So organisations have produced numerous carbon management plans over the years, and they've tended to focus on sort of energy efficiency and and payback periods, whereas now the narrative has really changed, and carbon management plans are carbon management plans, and they are to get you to net zero. So that's what I was tasked to do. I was tasked to do a decarbonisation plan, and that was really focusing on heat decarbonisation, which is the really tricky one. You know, what are we going to do with all these gas boilers that we've got all over the place? Because the grid is greening itself quite nicely. So we have done a decarbonisation plan. I'm very proud of what we've done. We've actually undertaken detailed energy surveys on each one of our operational buildings, and that also included creating digital thermal models based on the TM54. So we have this fantastic foundation for moving forward with our net zero carbon. We'll be able to play with different interventions to see how we're going to reach our net zero carbon, because every building is so unique and needs its own pathway individually. So we've done our decarbonisation plan, and I'm currently at the end of writing our carbon management plan, which is like a 6-year sort of bite-sized manageable plan to move us forward for the next 6 years, with some specific buildings identified, with some specific opportunities that we think that we can actually potentially deliver. So it's an exciting time to be part of this and having this conversation.
Excellent. So it sounds like the influence of the type of buildings that make up the estate are then quite a part of what that decarbonisation is and where you are in that. Do you have anything to add to that one, Syd?
So I think probably what I'm best doing is explain where we're at, because we're very similar position to Nia. I think just before I move on, what's really important to point out at this stage is that Nia's much closer to the work than I am. I'm one step removed, and I've got to give a big shout out to the team at the University of Liverpool, especially Rachel Hammonds-White, who does a great job leading that team. Rachel's our head of sustainability and energy, so important that I get that out first before I talk to you about what we're doing at the University of Liverpool. So we've very similar to Nia, we've gone through an early assessment and feasibility of decarbonisation of our heat networks and also energy operations. We've done the current and future demand assessment and identified a short list of technical solutions. Really complex for us because we're slightly different to Nia in that we've got a district heating network with CHP under one roof, technically across our campus. So slightly different, but we've got ongoing work to assess the energy performance of every single building, so TM54 that Nia mentioned before, and also to look at how we play with our on-site generation profile. That's about trying to reduce our carbon now to see, just playing some tunes on our energy generating and heat generating equipment to see what we can do to minimise our carbon consumption at this point now. So we've reviewed current and future energy needs of the campus and also our district network infrastructure position. Quite complex. Some of it's really old, some of it's really new. So, there's some difficulties and challenges there. Stand our current and future position on energy cost, including carbon market and how this affects us as participants in the UK emissions trading scheme. At the moment, we're working through some technology options, but also reviewing interim measures. So as I mentioned before, about playing tunes on our generating profile and how we can reduce our consumption. Typically, that would be through reducing consumption through summer and low demand periods. We're just taking a bit of a slight pause at the moment before we start phase 2. There's a big issue that we've got around ensuring we do our due diligence around the proposed technologies that we may be looking at. So we're just embarking on a more detailed engineering assessment of some of the proposals that we've come up with. I think the other thing that's topical at the moment is that we're just about to embark on our next round of energy supply. So that's going to impact on our energy and carbon allowance spend moving forward. That will be looking for the next 5 years. So our stated net zero position is 2035. And the work that we're doing at the moment is to try and get us to that state. But between now and then, we still need to consume to keep the lights on and keep people warm. I think the other thing that's probably worthwhile mentioning is that we're exploring commercial investment options. So that's about to working strategically with strategic partners to leverage technical and risk-shared solutions. There's also a strong history of good, robust energy and carbon reporting at the university, but we've also got a wide raft of statutory reporting obligations. So that incorporates the UK Emissions Trading Scheme, an Energy Saving Opportunities Scheme, Combined Heat and Power Quality Assurance Scheme, and now also the National Heat Network Regulation. So there's a huge amount of work that we need to do in terms of giving us assurance about how well we use the infrastructure.
So it sounds like a lot of it is focused at the moment around, so we've set the baseline of what it is for the estate, and then looking then towards the future for setting those targets going forwards. Do you have anything to add to that one, Robert?
I think from our perspective, what really comes across really strongly from what Nia and Syd have said, that there is not one size fits all solution. And I think there's no shortcuts to take for anybody to get to where they need to get to. People have to get under the bonnet and really kind of understand what needs doing on a case by case basis. And as Nia said, their campus is completely different to Syd's, and people shouldn't see that as a constraint. That's just the opportunity that's in front of them. Liverpool John Moores are spread all around the city, and that's really great from the perspective of being really close to different employers around the city, understanding the behaviours that those employers are expecting within their own property portfolios. Whereas, Syd is, although they've got the campuses over on the Wirral, the city centre campus for University of Liverpool, as Syd said, it's they've got an energy network. They can connect into that energy network. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all connecting to the energy network. There's 200-year-old buildings on one street, and there's 2-year-old buildings on another street. And so thinking that they can be resolved in the same fashion is wishful thinking. So from our perspective, we've really started, and that was one of the reasons that we started developing our own expertise and our own tools to actually help people like Nia and Syd at really, really early design stages to, look at the art of the possible without having to commission huge reports that take years and years to actually get to the bottom. So you can see trends very, very quickly, understand where it's worth investing time and energy into places that can help contribute to where each of the universities needs to get to.
I suppose it helps then to break it down into smaller elements and roadmaps so it becomes more achievable as a goal that can go forward as well.
That for me is, and Nia and Syd will know this better than me, but you see lots of sort of decarbonisation plans for universities, and the numbers that get bandied about in those, both in terms of the amount of energy that needs to be saved and the cost that to actually get to there, that they can be quite eye-watering. And so for me, once you start getting into the real detail, breaking it down, it feels so much more achievable than what initially feels like a completely impossible goal.
So I suppose moving on to have a look at then strategies for delivering decarbonisation, sort of thinking about how they've been broken down into these more achievable. How do you think better utilisation of buildings and space feature into overall energy reduction strategies? Because that sounds like a sort of a nice starting point for people to understand how they can improve their decarbonisation. How have you addressed that with your estate, Syd?
So we've taken a holistic approach. So, this is what the energy audits do that we carry out. We need to consider the building envelope, the fabric and the thermal performance, but it's also about the entire mechanical design, what we're consuming, the maintenance regime for the building. So, that's both including the the planned or compliance as well as the reactive, and also the building usage and also user habits. We've got 24/7 campus. We've got lots of residential accommodation. That's 24/7 activity, but we've also got high energy use areas too. But, for us, having one person in the building is not always different to having 20 people in it. So from an energy perspective, so it's about, reflecting on what buildings need to be open 24/7, and how we can reduce that use. But it's also, it mentioned about maintenance. So, having a rigorous maintenance and engineering regime is essential. We've got, relatively new buildings that high intensive use, but, we've managed to find funding for some of those. For one of those particular ones, our Materials Innovation Factory received some net zero project funding where we carried out the whole assessment, and there were some really useful findings. So I think the key and the trick to that is about being able to replicate it across the rest of the campus. I think one of the things that I didn't mention before around the heat networks about the metering as well, which is really increasingly important and also increasingly more regulated. But I think the other issue that we have is around the heat network. I mentioned about the condition and the different condition. We can have localized issues around building temperatures. Some of our older buildings that Robert mentioned before, the very old ones, our heritage buildings, are quite leaky. Some are actually really good as well, depending on the construction type. But we are working hard towards developing a comprehensive build up the technical issues that are looking at a network-wide approach. There's a lot of things that we're doing, and there's a lot of things that we're still learning as well.
Just to come off that, I think space management is an area that I don't think we've explored enough in terms of decarbonisation. I think universities have huge estates and some areas are not used as efficiently perhaps. And I don't mean in terms of the energy systems, I'm meaning the spaces are actually empty for quite a lot of the time. And I think really intelligent strategy around using those spaces really efficiently will really help us. So we're rationalizing the estate, getting rid of some of our perhaps older assets that don't perform very well, that are, leaky and are expensive to run. I think that's going to help the decarbonisation journey. I think using the spaces that we have more efficiently, so making sure that classes are being used all the time. Some universities, have statistics where space utilization can be as low as, below 30%, 20%. And it's like, well, why? You really want those spaces to be being used well. And on top of that, using intelligent controls, there's a bit more of this coming out now. So where spaces can clock that they're not in use, that all the systems just ramp back, just like lighting do, but ramping back on heating in that space when they're not being used. That is being seen a lot more at the moment. I was using it at my previous organisation at Salford University, and it's something that I want to look at here to really just minimise that waste.
I think just to add to what Nia said there as well, for me, there's a mindset in terms of our overall energy capacity in the UK. So at the moment, in broad terms, there's 170 gigawatts of gas energy available, 60 gigawatts of electricity available. As we decarbonise the grid, that gas eventually gets to zero and the electricity grid grows to 95 gigawatts. So going from 230 down to 95, for me, that really points towards a trend in terms of the amount of space that you should be dealing with. It's not just about buildings using less energy. It's about making buildings actually work really, really hard. And as Nia said, that the greatest crime is developing a really, really energy efficient building and there's nobody in there. That's not an energy efficient building. That's something that we really need to start thinking about with universities. And for me, there's developments now in technology in terms of timetabling technology to make sure that you use the right setting for the right type of learning that fits the pedagogy that is required at that particular point in time. And it's not just about that space being the space next door. It's about the space being the one that's actually right for 30 people or 20 people or 90 people, and not just being lazy and heating and lighting a space for 500 people when there's only 100 people in there, because already it's 5 times inefficient just in the people that are in that space.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We've seen a trend of crosshair across other university estates as well, looking at how they can better use the existing before they look at changing anything as such. Can they increase the efficiency of use in these spaces to have better utilisation? So I suppose going forward, what would you say your top priorities are for achieving your sustainability goals?
Top priorities. Well, if we're talking specifically about decarbonisation rather than sort of broader sustainability, even though sort of scope 1 is quite small compared to the whole package, if you look at scope 1, 2, 3, it is a key area for us to target. Heat decarbonisation is really a priority across the entire sector at the moment. I know Syd's looking at that with the CHP units there. And it's obviously what we're being steered towards as well. The government has a funding scheme called Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, and that is all towards, now it used to fund things like PV panels and things like that, but primarily it is about heat decarbonisation now. So that's where we're looking at the moment, looking where some of our older plant is coming to its end of life, and looking to jump on that opportunity as soon as it arrives, looking at what opportunities we have to draw down funding externally. So heat decarbonisation is a priority for us. Obviously, then when we're looking at sort of our broader emission sustainability goals, we start to bring in scope 3, and sustainable procurement is a key area for us. Procurement, as we've said before, is this huge chunk. I think it's about 56. It's over 50% of our emissions anyway, it is coming from scope 3, and it's quantified in a really poor way as well. It's just tends to be based on values that we spend with some sort of figure applied to it. So actually what I want to do here is really get into the detail of how you can quantify your procurement emissions better. We're currently working with some students, and hopefully working with some students and master's students to help us quantify our supply chain from IT. So basically looking at all the products that we purchase and trying to get a better grip on those emissions, because our scope 3 emissions are actually somebody else's scope 1 or 2 emissions, and everybody's calculating their carbon emissions at the moment. So we're hoping that we can draw down and pull some of that data through to us, and that we have a more accurate scope 3. So I, as an energy manager, I'm all about data and analysis, spreadsheets, love it all. So for me, I really want to start with the data on this, and that is one of my biggest priorities.
Syd, what would you say the top priorities are for you for achieving your sustainability goals?
I think it's a really great segue from there, and I completely agree with everything she said. That is that our top priority is about being evidence-based. So, collection of data and priorities around our meter network, both for energy and from a utilities and energy perspective, important to us. This is a one-off opportunity, this piece of work, to get it right and to invest in infrastructure that will be used for a long, long time moving forward. So our evidence base has to be rock solid. So completely get what Nia was saying there about data. I think the next priority for us is around a partnership approach. So whilst we're a large organisation with a reasonable amount of resources, we can't do everything ourselves, and that's both in terms of understanding what's going on, but also working as a place-based solutions. So whilst within the university we've got great expertise, we're also looking across the city, the combined authority, knowledge quarters, as well as tapping into engineering expertise in industry. But also, we also have a mindful of experts living in the next door to us in terms of Nia and colleagues like that. So, we've got a lot of expertise in Liverpool, and I think collectively when we combine all that together, I think we're in a really good position to help move things forward. So that leads into the third point, which is around knowledge exchange and sharing and leading best practice across the sector, and also looking at relevant policy networks, and also feedback on the national policy in this area where possible. So I think they're three key things. Not technical, spoke about technical before, but they're the things that we're really looking at the moment. So I think the key message there is about communication, collaboration, and working with other organisations to create solutions at scale.
I think from our perspective, Hira, again, it's music to my ears that, we've been hauled in front of university clients already that have essentially put us on notice to say, you're part of our problem. We love you, but you're part of our problem, and you're contributing, as Nia said, to over 50% of our scope, where our scope 3 emissions come from. And we've had our first university clients essentially putting us on notice now to say that they can't do businesses with businesses like ours after 2035 if we're not a net zero carbon business, because they simply cannot afford for us to be dragging them down. And for me, that is a really powerful tool to talk to our boards within our business to say, if you want to be serious about staying in this game, then we've got to be judged by our actions, not by our words. So I kind of absolutely love the idea of us having no alternative but to be a net zero carbon business sooner rather than later.
Quite interesting then. Actually, the zone of influence from the strategy is not just within the university, has such a wider influence then because of the sort of impact it has on the scope 3, so on that supply chain as well, which continues to have a knock-on, and a positive knock-on to other supply chains as well as to other projects and other estates, which is fantastic, isn't it? What other steps are being taken to address opportunities and challenges in achieving these Scope 3 emission reductions? Is there sort of anything else that helps to advocate with a green agenda?
Scope 3 is particularly challenging, as Rob said earlier on. It's something that's within our grasp, but beyond it. So I think at the University of Liverpool, we've got a university climate plan, which sets out our commitments in terms of baseline reporting on Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. We are assessing our carbon reporting against the AUC standard carbon emissions reporting framework. So that's identifying all possible streams that are practical for us to report on, and also, using a level of methodology that in terms of basic, intermediate and advanced. In terms of Scope 3 water, we're reviewing and planning for water and wastewater emissions. It's going to be developed over the next year, following outcomes from the energy audit project that we've been carrying out. In terms of waste, so we're currently on track to meet a 50% reduction of general waste tonnage. That's from a pre-COVID 10-year average baseline. So I've got a shout out now to Sam Hay, our waste and recycling officers, who've done some really incredible work. Sam's only been with us for a year or so, and the work that he's been doing for us is incredible. So big shout out to Sam and the team. So they're looking at improving the recycling infrastructure on site, diverting waste through introduction of food waste collections, and that will all have a positive impact on our Scope 3 emissions from waste. But we also plan to build on a success next year with the focus around lab plastics and also reduction of plastic from construction projects, and also the impacting in terms of waste from projects and IT waste. I think for me, biggest opportunity we've got around Scope 3 is stopping it coming in through the front door in the first place. So it's about the circular economy, responsible consumption, that type of focus. In terms of travel, from staff and student commuting, we've now resumed travel surveys, which we stopped over the COVID period, and we're doing that to provide evidence and insight into opportunities around initiatives and infrastructure changes that will help colleagues with the choice of their commuting habits. So a lot of work that we're doing there. I think the only thing probably around emissions from business travel, really challenging for higher education. A lot of our work is international. Increasingly, we're doing a lot more online now, but there's still that need for commute. But that's something that that we, not just the University of Liverpool, but as a sector, something that we're working hard on. Just going back, the one that I'm most excited about is about our supply chain emissions and how we can influence that through the circular economy. That for me is the key. If we can push hard on that, then we reduce the waste, we reduce our consumption, and that's largely about not just influencing our supply chain, whatever tier they're at, but also changing the way we consume within the university.
Nia, you touched on the opportunities you're using for the Scope 3 emissions with the using master's students to look at how to quantify it and as a sort of a study tool. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that one?
No, that is something that we're hoping to do. And, I've been here for a year and a half, and, we have this wealth of very intelligent people and future leaders, future researchers out there. And it's really just dawning on me now. I used to be sort of head down, data, getting the job done, but my head's starting to come up a little bit and go, actually, we've got a little bit of resource here. These MSci students need to do, various projects. How can we tap into that to help, especially with what I was saying before, that sort of Scope 3? How can we tap into that and use that to our advantage? So there's an opportunity there. I haven't capitalized on it yet fully, but the conversations are starting, and we do have this intelligence spread all over it here, so I really want to tap into that. But going back, if I can just add to something else that you originally asked Syd there about the challenges for me, it won't be won't be a surprise, but it is around funding. And it's how do we secure that in enough volumes to get us to where we want to be? And also changing the narrative of those discussions with finance. Again, Syd, you might be able to recognize this, but historically, when we went to finance and asking for money, it was very much about sort of energy projects and getting payback on those projects. And those days have really sadly gone now. Those low-hanging fruit opportunities, bit of insulation here, some controls here, lighting here, that would give you a payback have gone. But I think finance still expect that when you go and have these conversations, and changing the narrative to purely carbon savings, and sometimes saying, well, actually, our energy costs might actually increase from doing this exercise. It's a bit of a surprise, and it's a journey that needs to be supported. So in terms of how you turn that into an opportunity, I want to look at more training for across the university, so that everybody is carbon literate to a degree, and in a way that's relevant to their department, procurement, finance, even going up to the executive leadership team. I'm talking at the moment about getting a training slot, just so that we can start to explain some of this terminology, which can sometimes be, quite baffling. Things like embodied carbon, renewable energy power purchase agreements, heat decarbonisation. All these things can be a little bit overwhelming when, these executives have got 101 things to talk about. So I really want to get in there and get that opportunity to do some training, do some explaining, because if you just go with the pure business case, you've got 20 minutes to present a business case, and it's not enough to really bring people along with you. So training at that level, I think, is going to be key for us.
I think that's a fantastic point there, Nia. And again, we've been really lucky to be involved with a huge education project up in Scotland, 27,000 square metres in Passive House. So it's one of the biggest Passive House buildings ever to be built. It finishes in a couple of months now. And we didn't just see that as a project. We saw that as an opportunity to invest in our own technical expertise. And so we put our hands up at the beginning of the project and said, no one has ever delivered Passive House to this scale. So don't think that we can just go to the cookie jar, go and get you the answer. We're going to have to do some serious research on this to make it work. So we invested in 10 people across AHR to become Passive House designers. And that wasn't about us doing more and more Passive House projects. That was about the skill set that you get when you do that training. And so those people have got the confidence to have much more detailed conversations about the building physics and actually controlling models that have an ill influence on building physics. And that then led on to the work we were doing. We're designing this for Fife Council. So I did a series of these 30-minute workshops for the whole of the council at the start of the project to say, what is net zero carbon? What is air tightness? What's insulation? And as you said, Nia, these weren't for people just linked directly into the project. This was for the exec team. It was for the accounts team, all the people that were contributing in some way to the project. And that might not have been a technical contribution, but they then developed that vocabulary to understand why these demands were being made on them to invest in X, Y, and Z. And still 3 years later, I'm still doing lunchtime CPDs for the council. And for me, that is a, with a biggest smile on my face, that is a victory, that they still want to have those conversations with everybody across the council, because they realised that achieving Passive House wasn't actually the objective. Passing on a legacy project to the next generation in the council that uses as little energy as possible and costs them as little as possible to maintain. That's the victory for them. And it might have one label on, it might have another label on, but you can't lose sight of what the end goal was, which was doing more with less, essentially.
It's really interesting to hear all of that about the different buy-in and engagement across the different estates as well. I suppose then, how would student input influence campus decarbonisation, or maybe residents, for example, in that project that you were speaking about, Robert? So how much is it driven by student demand? So we've talked about then the narrative changing up at sort of finance and leadership level, but what about for students? Have you engaged much with that, Robert?
100%. We're seeing that a lot of this is student-led. With my other non-AHR hat, I'm a visiting professor. And so I trot down to Cardiff on a reasonably regular basis. And so at the coalface in terms of talking to students about what they want to see in their estate in the university. We've done some really interesting things with them over the last year or so around Freshers Week, and they don't call it Freshers Week anymore. It's got some new imaginative title that is called Carbon Literacy Week, which is your first week away from home, is actually understanding what the impact is that things have. And so, as an example, in the student union bar, we removed the financial cost of buying a drink in there, and we actually told them they had to trade in carbon. And so, a pint of locally brewed Brains Bitter was, 3 kilos of carbon compared to a international lager, shall we say, that was about 15 kilos of carbon. And you kind of looked at the size of the two, and the objective was, I want a drink. And they might financially have had the same cost behind the bar, but actually the hidden costs in terms of what the carbon was to actually get that bottle there, students really get that. They totally get that, and they totally buy into this idea of trying to move away from a world where excess is a good thing. They actually see that as something to be pretty embarrassed about now.
What have you seen with your estate, Nia, with the student voices driving that journey?
I'm sort of starting on that journey myself. I have been out and I've done sort of guest lectures for numerous courses, and I can see the enthusiasm around the table, the interest, and I can see how much sustainability, decarbonisation, carbon is popping up in different courses. An area I'm excited for this, I want this university to explore, and it's doing it anyway. It's one of our main themes in our climate action plan is teaching, and how can we support climate action through our teaching. And this is becoming increasingly important. I think there's emphasis on it in the People and Planet League, Times Higher Institution, all these sustainability league tables emphasize the importance of teaching. And so I think this is going to become more and more of a work stream as the university moves forward and it really gets into its climate action plan. We could see also at Freshers Fair, or whatever it's called now, the students loved coming over to our sustainability stand. We were playing How Bad Is the Banana game. I don't know if you've ever heard it. I highly recommend you play it if you haven't. And it was a really good engagement tool to play with the students. So there's plenty of enthusiasm. These are our future. They will and can influence things moving, once they've left university. So I'm keen to explore how I can support that more and how we can do that more as a university.
Excellent. I've got one more question that I'd like to put out there is, as a client, how can architects effectively support the culture shift at each stage of the design process? So stepping away from scope 3 and looking towards part of it as part of the design process.
Yes, well, this is a great question. And again, it's about shared learning, connecting, face-to-face, talking. And, I work in an office full of, 30 individuals who want regular CPD. And we've had a few lunchtime CPD sessions here, but, more would be very, very welcome on all these different aspects of sustainability and how we can improve every aspect of a project, down from, a chair to a floor mat to windows, anything, learning about all these different elements and how we could strengthen our carbon journey through that would be ideal. So I think architects are ideally placed to organise these types of lunchtime events, get that interaction with potential future clients and educate us, and in return we'll share where we are on our journey as well, and I think it would lead to better things.
So do you have anything to add to that one about how architects could support that culture shift in the design process?
I fundamentally agree with everything that Nia's just said then. I think it's critically important. I think the only thing I would add to that is that we, whilst we're at universities, quite a lot of our in-house staff and teams and experts work within the confines of what they're issued as tasks and projects. And quite often they're looking in at the project rather than looking out at what's available to be adopted or improved. So, quite often architects are working across a range of solutions, and they've got a really good understanding of emerging design solutions or technologies. And And I think that's really important to bring that into our project managers and just to raise awareness of the art of the possible. I mean, quite often Robert and I try to out-geek each other with new things that we've seen and come across, and I love it. I think it's really great. I mean, I'm a chartered environmentalist, but I'm continuously learning. The more I learn, the more I realise I don't know. So, even for me as a director responsible for this area, I've still got blind spots and gaps that I need to plug in, and I'm not on the technical coal face, so to speak, but it's important that those people who are and who can make a difference do make a difference. And one of the things that I keep saying to my colleagues is it's never ever too late for a positive intervention. Never ever. If that's the case, whether that's a part of whichever stage of the plan of works that you're at, always look for opportunities. And I think working with architects like Rob's really great for that. But please don't be. Finally, what I'd say is don't be shy about forcing these great new initiatives and design theories on us.
Just to add to that, one thing that I really, it really grinds my gears is professional teams sitting in silos and thinking they can't talk to other teams that are working for the same client, essentially trying to achieve the same outcome, and we try and hide from one another. For me, we're all getting to this finish line together. The target is about UK PLC. It's about saving the planet, and whether it's AHR or another practice that are working with a particular university at a particular time, we've got to improve those communication lines between teams, because we've got to be sharing expertise and knowledge. We've simply not got time to finish a project, start another project, finish a project, start another project. We need to cross-fertilise across all of those. And that's not just architects, then that has to bleed down into every single person that is involved with a project. And so, for instance, the job in Scotland I just mentioned, to achieve the sort of passive house air tightness requirements of 0.6 air changes an hour, the contractor at the start of the project, 0.6 is impossible, to quote them 2 years ago. It's impossible. We developed a series of details that we thought were going to be really not just robust in terms of saving them energy from improved infiltration, but were really quite buildable as well. They've just got the test back for the first 5,000 square metres on site, and it's come back at 0.31 air changes an hour. So we carried the baton through the design stage, and then we passed that baton. That 0.31 wasn't about AHR. That was about then the next people taking responsibility for that baton. And so then they can pass that baton on to the people that will be operating the building to make sure that they operate that building properly. And I think that, again, just making sure that we all don't lose sight of the fact that we're all in this together is a really, really powerful thing.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of the AHR podcast. So a big thank you to Syd, Nia and Robert for joining us and sharing their experiences. There are a number of different interesting discussions today. I have made many notes of the different things, but some of the ones that stood out was about looking at it, creating a baseline understanding about breaking it down into smaller achievable steps. So looking at utilization of the existing space and better promotion of existing spaces, and that the top priority is evidence-based. So looking at how to set goals that can be rock solid going forwards. And that scope 3 is such a big part of it. I personally had not realized it was such a large percent. And it's about that responsible consumption and looking at sort of that zone of influence out to the supply chain and focusing on circular economy as well. And that then also leads to shared learning and challenging, which encourages growth for all of us who are part of the same circle in there. So we hope our listeners have enjoyed this episode. You can find all our podcast episodes on our website, or you can subscribe via your preferred podcast platform. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to you joining us again next time.